Dara McAnulty lives with his family in County Down, Northern Ireland. Dara's love for nature, his activism, and his honesty about autism have earned him a huge social media following across the world and many accolades. That's how I found out about you, Dara. I found out about you on social media a few years back and have been hoping for this moment since. In 2017, he was awarded the BBC Springwatch Unsprung Hero and Birdwatch Magazine Local Hero. In 2018, he was awarded Animal Hero of the Year by Daily Mirror and became ambassador for the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and the I Will campaign. In 2019, he became a young ambassador for the Jane Goodall Institute and became the youngest ever recipient of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds Medal for Conservation. Dara's book, Diary of a Young Naturalist, has won several awards, including the Wainwright Prize for Nature Writing, the Hay Festival Book of the Year, the British Book Awards Book of the Year for Narrative Nonfiction. And if I read all the others, I'd be on screen way too long. So, Dara, welcome to Point Reyes Books from afar. One day we're going to have you here in person, I'm just sure of it. And our other guest and friend, Helen Macdonald, who has been to the store and knows Point Reyes well. We were talking about sanderlings and migratory whale routes and things before. Helen is a writer, a poet, illustrator, and naturalist, and an affiliated research scholar at the Department of History and Philosophy of Science at the University of Cambridge. She is the author of the best-selling H is for Hawk, as well as Cultural History of Falcons, titled Falcon, and 3 collections of poetry, including Shaler's Fish. Macdonald was a research fellow at Jesus College, Cambridge, and has worked as a professional falconer, has assisted with the management of raptor research and conservation projects across Eurasia. She now writes for the New York Times Magazine, and her latest book is Vesper Flights, beautiful collection of essays, out in paperback soon here. With that, I'm going to hand things over to Dara. Dara's going to read a little bit for us, and then the conversation will go. And we're so excited to have you both here and to have everybody tuning in from across the world. I saw someone joining us at 4 a.m. in Japan. So thank you for waking up early or staying up late, whatever it is. Thanks for being here, everyone. I'll pop back onto at the end. And with that, with much fanfare and excitement, here's Dara and Helen.
Thank you, Stephen. I don't know about you, Dara, but whenever I hear introductions like that, I start thinking, who is this person that is being spoken of? Just like, it's so strange. For introductions. Dara, it's such a joy to finally meet you virtually. You've been a really joyful presence on the internet for a very long time, and I adored your book. And I wonder if we could maybe start by hearing some of it. I'd love to hear if you wanted to read a little section. That would be a complete joy. Just a couple of minutes or something from somewhere in the book.
Okay, so I think you'll enjoy this a little bit, Helen. And I've never actually read this little bit of the book out loud for like months now, so it'll be good to do this one. Dave is larger than life, and his family are there, along with his teammate Simon, who has smiling eyes and a very sharp wit. Dave talks about what we're going to do and why we're doing it. It's such brave, important work, and I feel incredibly privileged to be joining them. When Dave hands me a satellite tagging device, I'm amazed at how light it is, and that such a small piece of technology can monitor the bird's movements anywhere with a network connection. Until the solar batteries break down a few years from now. Ideally, none of this would have been necessary. The technology, the conservation teams, the constant vigilance, the responsibility, the heartbreak. But so long as raptors like goshawks, golden eagles, hen harriers, buzzards, and red kites are persecuted, this sort of human intervention is necessary. Satellite tags can help build a picture of where the birds travel and where they disappear. We continue on our way in Dave's truck along with his dogs, Simon and another member of the conservation team, whom we pick up before reaching the Spruce and Sitka plantation. It's still late morning when we arrive. We can't drive any deeper into the plantation, so we get out and trek with the equipment. The sun warms my skin. My ears pick out a robin, then chaffinches. It doesn't take us long to find the first nest. Guano marks the ground below it, and white feathers are stuck to fallen branches. Reverent whispers travel between us as Simon and Dave delicately lay the tools out. A harness is clipped on. Arms and legs go rocketing expertly up the tree at an astounding speed. I stand below and can make out the mewing sounds of the chicks above. There in the distance, the mother starts calling. Her sounds aren't repetitive for now, nor is she swooping at us. The signs are all good, but I hope she doesn't get distressed. I stare up to the nest, transfixed, stroking one of Dave's dogs to calm my nerves. I can see a bundle being carefully lowered in the orange bag, full of promise. I inhale every scent and every sound in the forest, pine dry earth, the creaking branches. There are crossbills somewhere chattering. Although I've never seen crossbills either, I hold in my excitement because the goshawk has arrived at the ground level. I feel something turning inside me. We catch hold of the rope at the bottom, unclip the bag from the harness and lay the bundle onto the ground. The chick looks like an autumn forest rolled in the first snows of winter. The plumage is still downy, feathery constellations shine out all over it, breathtaking. We are all in awe. It stares at me deeply. The searching blue eyes and powerful beak are offset, almost amusingly, by its tufty crown of brown studded with stars. Dave gives me the job. Oh my god, I'm getting really happy just reading it. Dave gives me the job of writing in the logbook. It feels good to be useful. And I take great care to get all the information correct as the chick is tenderly weighed, measured, ringed, and tagged. It's a technological ballet, not surgical or invasive. And afterwards, the chick sits on the ground as if it were still in its nest, quite unfazed, its head bobbing. Then the process starts over again. 2 more chicks are lowered in the orange bag, weighed, measured, ringed, tagged. I find the whole operation mesmerizing. This delicate interaction between birds and people, the closeness of one species to another doesn't seem quite right somehow, and yet completely enchanting. Perhaps I'm just not used to it. I'm going to stop there because there's a bit more.
It's a perfect place to stop, and I think you really get across not just what makes goshawks extraordinarily special birds, the sort of ghosts of the forest, these incredibly heavily armed, spooky creatures, but also the way that when you are in the presence of goshawks, somehow, I don't know whether this is something that you've found, because I've also done this, I've also been there and held these birds, but the whole environment of the forest becomes kind of richer, and the sounds become deeper, and you just sort of become really, really, really in tune with where you are. It must have been an amazing moment. Did you smell them? Because goshawks smell amazing.
Oh yeah, I smell them. It's got a very distinct smell. I put it on, but it's the goshawk smell.
It's the goshawk smell. It's kind of peppery and weird and kind of spicy. Yeah. So there you go, everyone. You now know that goshawks have a particular smell. Thank you for that. That was just such a joy to hear. I just talk about, there's a little bit after that, you talk about the emotional impact of holding one of these heavy, kind of warm, fluffy, but spiky creatures. And you say this is a very sort of visceral emotion. It's kind of deep in your bones. And you say it's kind of like love and longing, but it might be something else. And I one of the things I loved about this book was how absolutely fearless you are about talking about the emotional impact of the natural world on you, which is something quite a brave thing to do. And I try and do it as well. So I guess it would be really great if you could give people who haven't read the book a sort of sense of what nature does for you emotionally. How is it? It's a sort of place of ease and refuge for you. Like, what does it do to be out in the wild?
Nature is everything for me. It's the place where I feel the most comfortable. It's where I feel the most calm. I go out into nature to get peace because it was my escape. But even though it's was my escape. More was my place. It was the place where I could go, where nobody judges you. Like I always say, the tree ain't gonna lay any judgment on you. You can be in this world where it's almost you leave the human one behind and all your regrets and troubles behind, and that's so liberating. It gave me one, it gave me a lot of hope. It gives me all my energy, and it also gives stability as well. It feels rooted, and that was really, really important for me in a constantly changing world, to have a place where you could go, and that almost, it stayed the same. Almost like you could predict what was going to happen in the forest, like you could predict the seasons, and there wasn't going to be massive changes like on a yearly basis. And that for me was really, really important, because it was like I could go, well, the blackbird's going to sing in spring, and I'm gonna, and mapping out my year like that, was pretty anchoring.
I absolutely love that sense, and you bring it out really well in the book, that sense that nature both provides you a sense of continuity and stability with things like the changing of seasons, or you know the oak tree the blackbird's going to sing from, but at the same time, when you go out there, you never quite know what you're going to encounter. So you've got that wonderful tension between safety and security and knowing what's going to be there, and then the kind of excitement just not knowing.
It's like, I know what I can probably see, and I know that the trees are going to look a certain way, but I don't know what's going to be in that tree, and that's where the excitement comes from.
Exactly. I'm sorry if I'm going too fast with questions. I get very excited about nature, so if you keep waving my arms and shouting questions, please just tell me to stop.
Oh, that's perfectly fine.
There's a great bit in the book I was really interested in, a bit where you talk about how you do a lot of walking and looking at the natural world now. And what you used to do more commonly, I think, from the book, is you said you used to lie down and wait for smaller creatures to come towards you. And I've done both those things. I remember when I was a kid, lying in the grass and staring at springtails and getting focus on these tiny creatures. And I guess I was really interested in why that change has happened, and what difference it makes to walk and watch nature compared to staying in one place, if that's a question that makes sense to you.
Well, I definitely do both still. But I think walking is what I do to like just relax and chill out and release a little bit of stuff. And sometimes I completely let go of the world, and and I can enter that peaceful state that I can be in nature. But when I'm sitting and staying, I am actively tuning into the natural world a bit more, and embracing that connection with the natural world a bit more. And I think they're two very different experiences, but they're both really, really important for me, because I need to be able to sort of go off into my own thoughts for a while. But also, I also really need to see a new insect or all these different creatures. Is that the jackdaw?
It's the jackdaw. Okay, I'm going to have to do this. I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm afraid I was given an orphan jackdaw the other day, and I have to feed it. This is so embarrassing. I feel like this small bird is stealing both our thunders. So this is a small jackdaw. Doesn't have a name yet, and he is being insistent. So I'm going to see if he wants some food. Do you want some food? Yeah. Yes. There we are. Is that enough just to keep you quiet? Okay. Sorry. Oh dear. The trials of being a nature person. Darren, you get this. Whenever spring comes, everyone gets in touch with me and tells me they have baby birds in their garden and what should they do? Like, leave them alone. Do you get that as the nature expert? The problem of being a nature expert is people asking you what to do with baby birds?
I don't think I really get that as much. I don't think, because I think I'm younger. I'm a young person. It doesn't. I wouldn't consider myself an expert in any field yet. So if anybody asks me a question, I'm like going, I consider if I haven't studied it, I probably am not the best person to be able to tell you.
I'm sure that will come. I'm sure that the bird will be in touch.
Yeah, they'll start coming.
But the young thing I think is really, really important, because as you know, nature writing has traditionally been a kind of older bloke kind of thing, that, it tends to be neurotypical older white guys. And one of the things that I've really loved over the last few years is this sense that there's much more diversity in nature writing, that you have people of color and you have women and you have younger people writing and people on the various on the spectrum. I'm so sorry. I will. I wonder if you had some things to say to us all about the why it was important for you as a younger person to write a book like this.
I think the importance of the book only came to me a little bit after writing the book.
Yeah.
And it sort of dawned on me that by writing a book as a young person, perhaps we could get more young people actually writing, because I'm a great believer in that we need a more diversity in writing and art, because from all of these different viewpoints and angles, from different age groups, different ethnicities, you can get this much more diverse and beautiful picture of the world that we live in if we have all of these different ways of looking at it. And so with the book, I was sort of like, well, like you said, in nature writing, there ain't that many young people. It's very specific group of people, and it doesn't have to be that way. It's a writing genre that can be done by anybody who has a love of the natural world, or even if they want to love the natural world more, writing can be a way of doing that as well. And the thing about writing is that it doesn't even need to be published in a way. It's just, writing is one of those things that you can do for yourself more than anybody. The diary originally was literally just me putting my thoughts out onto a page, so they wouldn't be doing damage up in here, because everything's sort of colliding up in there. And so I wanted, if I get it out, then it's nice and orderly, although it's really not orderly when it first comes out. But in some form on the page, I can feel a little bit more secure about my thoughts. And so I think everybody can benefit from a bit of writing, or any other art form that you choose, like painting or music or something. But
yeah. No, that's really absolutely relevant to my own fascination with the way that writing interacts with memory and the experience of nature. So people often ask me, do you take out a notebook when you go for walks in the natural world? Do you take notes? And I don't. I mean, I remember stuff really clearly, so I come back, and quite often it's when I'm writing about the memories, which are really sharp, that's when I start thinking about what's happened. So when you're out in the natural world, are you always thinking about the meaning of what you're seeing, or does that come later when you're writing about it? Or is that a hard question to answer? It might be impossible.
So I can talk a little bit about how I write. So basically, I go into the natural world and I sort of take everything in. I observe. I sort of see what's going on in the natural world, and that sort of, I take everything in. And I don't usually, sometimes I take a notebook out, but quite often I don't really sometimes. It's a hit or miss thing whether or not I remember the notebook, because I'm horrifically forgetful. And then what I do have is lots of notebooks scattered around the house. So whenever I get a thought, I just grab a random notebook lying around, write in my thought, because I know I'll be forgetting about it in 5 minutes. And then in a month's time, I'll collect up all the notebooks, and then I'll copy them out onto a page, and then I'll shrink them down. And I usually find that a few notebooks of stuff can actually come down into a single page.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wow.
And then I sort of work it into something that is coherent and can actually be read.
So it's a real craft, and I mean, I know the book initially there was sort of writing, there was blog, there was I'm just going to have to put the towel over this bird because it's being extremely sorry. I'm so sorry, everyone. I did not expect him to be so. He's basically attention seeking. He's like, what's going on over there? So, but the book itself, I know, came out of some conversations initially with your British publisher about producing just a little book.
Yes.
And it kind of grew.
Yeah,
so
that was the sort of idea.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, that was the idea. It was like just a little bit, give up the Twitter followers. It'll be all nice and small, and like it won't really be technically like sold and everything. And then I just kept on writing and writing. It was definitely around about springtime when I was just like, yep, here we go. I'm writing a book now. So that's why I think spring reads slightly differently to the rest of the book. And spring sounds a little bit more bloggy because I was still in the blog phase at that point. But after that, after spring, so the Goshawk was actually probably the first one that I wrote, knowing that it was going to be published. So that actually makes the Goshawk one a little bit, gives it a bit more interesting, because it's like, it was the first one where I was consciously going, oh I'm writing on this stuff to be published rather in spring, where I was just writing it for, as a diary.
And I really felt as I read the book that you changed a lot in the arc of those seasons. And it was really interesting because it wasn't just that you, I guess, I mean, I don't want to use the word matured, sounds like it's really big. I don't mean that, but you became a little bit of a different person over those, the passing of time and when what happened to you. But also the style of the book is a little bit, it changed a little. Wow, it's really interesting. And was that something that you saw as you wrote the book?
I do think that the writing improves throughout the book, but that's character development because it's a diary, and so the author is the main character. And so if the author is getting better at writing, then the main character is getting better at writing as well. And that's just some nice development. So when during the editing process, I was like going, I know this isn't from a literature standard point of view, this isn't the best piece of writing, and technically, like on a technical point of view, but it sort of contributes to the book. So I was like, we're going to try and keep it as raw and unedited as possible, and in that sense, and that's sort of why we get that. Like to this day, I enjoy winter as a chapter more than any other bit of the book, because I think that's the best chapter.
I like them all, but I can see the differences, but I like the differences between them. Yes. And with my own essays, I tried, they're all very different styles, and I like to think that they talk to one another. It's kind of a nice feel. I really wish I'd put this jackdaw in another room, but we're going to keep going. One of the things also I love about this book is the way you're extremely fierce about, in a good way, about how people are frightened of nature. They're frightened of it being dirty. And I increasingly, and I'm sure you get this as well, the way people talk about nature and the way that you're encouraged to interact with it in everyday society, it's like it's through plate glass. We're supposed to just look at it from a distance and not touch it. And we police those spaces that are ours really clearly. I remember I was in India a few years ago, and I stayed in a hotel that had a pair of doves nesting inside the room on an air conditioning unit, and it was amazing. Obviously if I'd been birds, it would have not have been, but I was really moved by that sharing of space. So how do you fight against this sort of fear of the dirtiness of nature? How do you encourage people to get their hands dirty and love what's there rather than be frightened of it? Do you have any answers for that?
Well, I think, first of all, it comes from parenting. It's saying that something's not dirty as a child, because if you hear it as a child, when you're a child, it's when you learn what's dangerous, what's good, what's bad from your parents. And if you're being told by your parents that something's dirty or something's dangerous, it's going to be imprinted into your mind that something is dangerous. It's just natural survival instincts. It's like if your parents teach you that something's bad, you're going to treat that something as bad, and it's pretty hard to get that out of your brain at that point. So that's the first. And I always like to say that I have been picking up feathers, putting my hands in mud, going places that are climbing trees, doing all sorts of random stuff, and I'm still around. I haven't caught any random disease that's from feathers or anything like that. I'm pretty much okay. So it's probably fine.
I'm speaking as someone who's got like feathers and skulls all over the place. It's like I'm quite a gothic naturalist in this house. I remember I used to, if I found dead birds, I'd sorry, I probably did a little bit gothic for lunchtime in California, but I remember I used to get the skulls when they still had sort of feathers and stuff on, and I'd wrap them in chicken wire and I'd put them on top of a big ant's nest, and then the ants would clean the skulls. It was thrilling for small me. Like, oh, not another one. Bless them. So talking, I wanted to ask that question because obviously, there's a lot of in your book that one of the things I admire most about you is the sense of mission that you have. I feel very strongly about the climate emergency, the sixth extinction that we are all in, and a lot of the time, people ask about hope and about how to maintain it in this era. I think my job, because I'm not a very good campaigning writer, is to just try and show people the complexity and beauty and diversity that's there, because I want them to love it, right? That's the first stage. But you managed to go further, and you were really explicit about, I think you describe it as shouting from the rafters about how we could be doing more for the natural world. And you do a lot of campaigning and activism. And I wondered, what that's like. Is it stressful? Is it a difficulty, or are you just sort of buoyed on that sense of meaning and purpose that carries you?
I'm not entirely sure, almost, because it's been a while since I've done any active protesting because of the lockdowns. But I've always found it to be I've always found it to be so empowering to be able to do this sort of stuff. But now I've sort of changed my view on how activism can take place. And I've almost come to this realization that activism can be done for so many different ways, not just through active protest, but also through the arts, writing. Our words have meaning, and that was a really big realization for me. It was actually, I think, almost how I concluded the book was sort of this realization that words and writing and art, it has actual worth for the real world. And it, like, that for me was massive. It gave me hope, and I think that came a little bit more into the fore with not the traditional ways that you protest, that people started using these other mediums for getting activism across. And it was quite inspirational to see lots of people writing and creating paintings, art, music. I've always thought that we need both of those methods, because we need first of all, we need the protesting and the traditional protesting to get world leaders to actually do change. That's what that's for. But I think art has a different sort of activism. It's for the people who aren't world leaders, in a sense. It's for creating wonder of the natural world. And it's always been my view that we need to think about, if we solve this crisis, why are we going to solve it? What's going to be the reason? What pulls us all together to solve the problems that are in front of us? And I think that if we solve all the problems because of fear of that the world is going to end, which is a large amount of fear, what happens when you remove that fear? What if we solve all the problems and the fear is gone? Does all the problems just come back again and again and again? And you go into this cycle of constant fear, and then the fear goes, and then everything gets worse again. Which that's not healthy or good, or long-term strategy. But what if we decide to come together as a world to protect it because of the wonder that we feel of the natural world? That is long term. That lasts forever. That lasts for your entire life if you get it, that wonder of the natural world. And so even when the crisis ends, you'll still love the natural world. You'll still have that connection.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is almost just as valuable, because we need the protest to get the changes done, but to have the changes stick for the foreseeable future, we need artists. And so that's why I want to see as many writers and nature writers from across the world writing about this really, really this beautiful, beautiful world.
Absolutely, and there's a lovely moment in your book where you this statement that I believe into the very core of my being, and that is that certain acts of attention and careful observation can be just as much acts of resistance, right? They can be revolutionary to the individual human heart, and I think that's a really beautiful sentiment, and exactly fits this notion that it's like diversity in protest too, right? It's not just marching in huge crowds. It's individual activism. It's individual acts of love and astonishment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I'm quite moved, actually. I don't know what to say. And I think that is a very hopeful message, and hope is a word that's bandied around a lot. And as we know, if you're full of despair, you don't do anything, and if you're full of optimism, you don't do anything. You need to work really hard to keep this space open for uncertainty about the future that we can inhabit. That's really great. I don't know. I've gone really quiet now. Oh, really emotional.
I think the idea of that notion that there's different ways of activism means that everybody can get involved. If you thought that perhaps you don't want to do protests because it's just real, you feel really uncomfortable by putting yourself into a pretty vulnerable situation, that there are other ways of making your voice heard, which I think is because putting yourself out in protest it's pretty it can make you feel really vulnerable inside, actually protesting on the streets and putting yourself out there, which is because I found it pretty, it's exposed, it's pretty exposed out there. So yeah, anybody can do it. Anybody can take part in activism.
Yeah, that is a very, very strong and very important message, and it's sort of made my mind go from this notion of people having different sort of, I don't know, I'm thinking about the pandemic actually in lockdown, and how, I don't know whether you remember, back in the early days, there was a lot of talk about how, it's okay because, if you can just go for walks in the countryside and it will give you solace and freedom. And I'm thinking, yeah, but what about everyone who's living in a crowded inner city with, limited financial resources? You can't just walk out of your house and go and run around in a forest. It's not everyone is lucky to that. So I guess I just sort of wondered about, we're so often sort of taught that, of course, the wilder places are, in terms of their ecological health, are just better than impoverished, urban places. But in terms of people, what would you say to someone who was like, well, how can I relate to nature if I live in a city? What can I do? Where can I find those moments of contact? What is there for them? Do you have any thoughts on that? I've got some, but
okay. So I grew up in a city. I grew up in Belfast, which is it's a pretty congested. It's nothing to New York or somewhere, but it's still pretty it can be a bit hard to find natural places. And so I had to look for all of the little things, all the little creatures, the beetles, the pigeons. I love the pigeons.
I think when it's raining and they put one wing up for the rain to hit your armpits. I love it. Sorry.
I to this day I have a great love of pigeons just from that early childhood. There's sometimes you can find local parks in cities, which are amazing. But if you can't, honestly, just looking up into the sky or on the ground, because there's life everywhere, even in the most barren wasteland of a city, life somehow manages to get there. It's quite inspiring, really, when you take, let's say you spend about 5 minutes just trying to find something, anything, and then when you find something, try and look at all the minute details of that creature and organism, because all creatures are innately complicated and beautiful and complex and interesting. And so if we tap into that, then there's so much experience out in the city. It's pretty cool when you think about it like that.
It is really cool. I had this weird experience a few years ago when I went up to the Empire State Building to watch birds, migrating birds at night, and you know, the sky was full of them. And I spoke to an aeroecologist who told me that once you get above about sort of, I don't know how many, about 600 foot, there's no difference between a city and the surrounding countryside. You know, that the air is full of life. You know, it's you know, we are living, as you know, in this time of great biodiversity loss, but there's still so much out there to look at. So it's just really, and I think that, you know, this notion of joy and wonder is so important. You know, I think in the book you talk a bit about how so often joy and wonder are considered to be childish things, and they're sort of things that people expect you to put away once you grow up. And I reject that utterly, and I've given up worrying about it. Like, I'm just going to be joyful. But it's like one of the things your book does, which is lovely, is it gives readers permission to just to be joyful, which is, I think, a gift to people.
Yeah.
That wasn't a question, was it? That was just me complimenting. The pandemic was weird. Did you get that thing where everyone was sort of saying, you know, people keep, I don't know, I've been asked a lot of times, you know, has nature been affected, you know, by the pandemic? And I find this kind of rather sweet, because it's like something so huge has happened to our human world. People expect there to be something huge happening in the natural world too. And I mean, maybe some grass verges haven't been mown, you know, but basically it's the same. Have you been asked that as well? Like, yeah.
It has been basically the same. Like, I think that we've noticed a lot more of nature because we're in our gardens, and we are suddenly going, oh my goodness me, there's so much nature out here. And it's not, perhaps it's not the nature's changed, but we have, and we're paying a lot more attention. We're not, when the human world basically stopped, we had to look at the other moving parts in our world, which was nature. And so we suddenly discovered this massive amount of life. And I think that almost tricked us into believing, for quite a number of people, that like, well, there are the obvious exceptions to that rule, like in Venice when the canals cleared up because of the lack of boats, and then dolphins started. But that was just pollution stopping nature from getting in. So that's the obvious exception. But for most of nature, it stayed basically the same. And the world just keeps on chugging along, which is quite hopeful, in the sense that even the entire human world can completely collapse, but the world still has that constant that constancy to it, and it'll just keep on going, which is quite nice to see. That
it's a nice feeling. There's been one very weird side effect here. I live in a arable farmland in Suffolk in England. There are a lot of pheasant shoots around here, and every year people release a lot of pheasants to be shot. It's kind of grim. And this year they got released, but there were no shoots. So basically it's a bit like a free-range pheasant farm out there. There are so many pheasants wandering around. It's kind of joyful, actually. I really love it. I think we're probably going to go into questions in a second, Dara, but I want to ask you a sort of more literary question. One of the things also that I really noticed in your book was how often and how sweetly and beautifully you move towards talking about myths and older stories. Because quite often we're sort of taught that the way to talk about nature has to be science, right? It only has to be science. Of course, we need science to do the work, right? But the stories, the myths are really important in your book, and I'd love you to talk a bit more about what you're doing there.
Okay, so for me, myths are amazing. It was the first bit of, I guess, technically fiction that I ever read, because I didn't read any fiction books until I was like 10. There was only fact books up until that point. If you ever see eyewitness books in libraries, I've read every single one of them. Which, if you know the series, is there's a lot. So that's basically what I spent a lot of my life doing. And then I found myths, which is almost like the sort of the jump from non-fiction into fiction. But it wasn't too large of a leap because there's some historical anyway. But it was also my way of understanding the human world came from myths. That all of these stories that were made up to try and explain what was going on in our world, from ancient people, how they looked at everything. And that for me gave almost this new way of looking at the world, if that sort of makes sense. Because I firmly believe that if you ever read a story about something, you look at it in a slightly different way. You gain that knowledge of all of this background knowledge of the stories behind something. It becomes something more than that. And that's what myths represent for me. It represents humans taking something that may seem ordinary or simple or not really important and giving it this whole air of complexity and almost history and liveliness. Like, for example, there's the flower called the anemone. It's a whole family of flowers. I talk about one species in the book. I know there's going to be some Greek mythology person who's going to go, that isn't the technical species of the blood of the Adonis. But basically, the anemone comes from, there's a whole love triangle going on between Adonis, Ares, and Aphrodite. It's a whole complicated mess. It ends up with Ares turning into a boar and goring out Adonis in traditional Greek style. And blood of Adonis spills onto the ground and becomes the flower, the anemone. And the Adonis anemone is actually a purple, a blood purple flower, which is a slightly cooler color to the white of our ones, but it still has that essence of it. It sort of makes the wood anemone, which is a beautiful flower, seem even more impressive. That these stories, this mythology has so linked to our landscape that it's create this almost extra layer to the world that we live in.
Absolutely, that sense that every creature and plant that we meet is not only purely and utterly itself, but it's made out of all the stories we've ever told about it. And that just seems to me the most beautiful meeting of humanity and nature, in a way that, you know, the world is not here for us, just for us. It's here for everything, but we make it out of the stories we tell. And I think your book is one of those great stories in a proper sense. And everyone should read it. So everyone read it, everyone buy it. Dara, I'm going to look at questions. I don't really stop. I could chat with you for like the rest of the okay, I'm going to just read them out. So, and again, let me know if you want me to move on or whatever. So I've got a question here. Oh, Jackie Morris has just asked, what books have you been reading during lockdown? I know lots of people who read a lot have found it hard to read in lockdown. And Jackie's found solace in poetry. So what have you been reading and what's been great?
So I've actually been struggling to read a little bit in lockdown. I've got this big wall of books behind me. What? Sorry,
Yay!
Yeah. So I've been reading books like I've been reading June. I've been rereading The Lord of the Rings. It's summertime, which means my reread of Lord of the Rings is in order. I read. Oh, this is one. Wait a second. I'm going to be writing a new book soon, and it's going to be about Irish mythology.
Oh,
so I've been gathering up lots of different mythological books. Wait a second. I'm just going to try and fight for all my.
So if you're like,
right?
If you're like,
lots of mythology. Lots of Agatha Christie, I must admit. That's something. Lots of murder mysteries. So I've been Stephen Fry's Greek mythology books, the Orkney sagas, which is sagas from the Orkney Islands, which is sort of at the very north of Scotland, and lots of different Irish mythology books. I've got Seamus Heaney's Death of a Naturalist, which is a poetry book. Lots of random books. I've kind of struggled reading through lockdown. I don't know what it is. But my reading rate slowed down.
Yeah, I read a lot of science fiction, and I understand exactly why you would be going back to Tolkien at this point.
Yeah. Yes.
Rolling, it's comforting and challenging at the same time. But I'm really excited about your mythology book. It sounds like a secret. I'm really excited.
I'm very excited about it. It's good. It's sort of going to. I don't know when it's going to be released, because the original idea of it was to go around places in Ireland and then sort of write about how the landscape connects with myth and stories, and just talk about stories, landscape, nature, Celtic mythology, primarily Celtic mythology.
Yeah.
But since I couldn't visit any places, it's sort of been put on hold for a little while. So I don't know when it's going to be released, but it will be released at some point. There will be a Celtic mythology book.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to move to the question. I've got one from Olga here. This is slightly very different tone to the last question, which is what you're reading. This is advice. She says, Dara, my son and I, both sub-teachers, participated in Friday climate walkouts, and we were saddened to see so few adults from their 20s to 40s. Do you have any suggestions how to reach that group of people and help them engage or encourage them to engage? Thank you.
That's actually a really good question. 20s to 40s. I would first of all say that people in their 20s are pretty different to people in their 40s. So they're completely. It's all like trying to get people in their 20s is a whole different task, because they're fighting with student loans and trying to deal with the problems that are happening for people in their 20s at the moment, which are pretty severe at the moment. So it's been really, I think I'm going to talk about, I don't really know what to say about people in their 40s, but I can talk about for their 20s, people in their 20s and young people who are maybe just coming out of university or utterly broke because universities cost so much. And then the economy is being a bit of a wreck. It's really difficult to get jobs. And then almost having this entire crisis being told to them, and they don't feel like they can do anything about it and they can't go to strikes because they got to work. It's like, and if they don't work, then they get fired, which is a horrible situation to be in, to try and get these people out into protest. So I think for the people who can't go on protest, we've got to protest even harder. Because I think that's the thing that we've got to realize, is that it's really difficult for some groups of people to actually take a lot of time out of their day and do these strikes. So I think that's what we first got to realize. But when we're trying to, so don't feel too sad that they're not joining in. There's probably a lot going on in their world at the moment. But what I would say is that you can try and talk to those people. You can do education. You can put out posters, leaflets. You can do all of that sort of stuff, and you can you can try all of those little schemes together and try and educate them. They may not be able to process, but at least they can love the natural world a little bit more, which I think would be the best case scenario. I don't know really what to say about 30s and 40s. They're too far away from me at the moment.
Yeah, you'll get there, I'm afraid. It's funny. It's a really very beautifully clear and important answer, and it made me think of, again, I feel guilty about mentioning my book, but one of the essays in it is about swifts and how every evening and dawn, a proportion of the adult population will fly up thousands of feet into the air in order to orient themselves, to know what the weather's going to be like in the horizon, and to kind of orient themselves by the stars and by polarized light. The thing is, and they do that as a community. They follow each other to know what they're going to do next. But not all swifts are doing that. Like, there are a lot that are on nests. There are the young birds that don't. So basically, it's like only birds that can do it, that are not, that are free to do it, will do it, right? And I think there's something there that reminded me of that. It's like some people really can't get out there and protest. It doesn't mean that it's important, but they just can't. So we have to take slack for them. Yeah.
Yes, we go. So the people who can have to pick up the slack. That's it. And all we can really blame is the policies that have been put in that have stopped the ability for many people. Like it's pretty bad here, but it's nowhere near how bad it is in the US, I must admit. So I think patience is the key one for those for that age group especially. So I think that's my answer.
Great answer. We got one more question, and I think we may have to go and sit down and have a cup of tea in our respective rooms. And it's actually a question is, Dara, did the process of writing this book lead you to think about or see the natural world in a different or closer way? The actual process of writing it, did it change the way that you think about or see the natural world?
Well, I don't think it. I think I changed. I definitely changed during the writing process. I don't know if it was the writing process itself which caused that change, because the writing process itself is how I process the natural world. So the writing of the natural world is how I see them, is how I process everything. So I don't think, because I've always written, it's sort of just a natural part of my life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think I've changed to become more closer with nature, but that's just natural progression throughout my life. But the actual, I feel like me and writing are so bound together at the moment that that's sort of what caused it. If that sort of makes sense.
No, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense. I know exactly what you mean. It's a really beautiful point. I'm really fed up now that we've got to stop, actually, to be honest. What a lovely event you have created. Dara, it's been so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you both. If it wasn't bedtime where you are, I would insist that you just stay on for all of us. Well, thank you, Dara. Thank you so much for both the book and for this conversation. And Helen and Jackdaw, thank you.
Jackdaw.
I thank you for everyone who tuned in tonight from across the world, and Dara, we really have to get you to Point Reyes at some point in the future. Gonna come visit us, see some whales and some birds, and this has been really amazing. I don't know how I'm gonna actually. I'm now at the point where I'm like, okay, do I eat lunch? I think I need to go for a walk. I need to go out into the woods.
Go for a walk, Stephen. And thank you everyone for coming. And I really hope that well, I'm sure I'll get to meet Dara in person at some point, and I hope to meet lots of you guys too. So have a good day.
Have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.